Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Everyone, and welcome to a very spooky episode of Prose and Cons, where sometimes we feel like monstrous prose and sometimes we feel like undead cons.
Oh, I'm getting chills already. This is too spooky for me, Phoenix. I don't know.
Sorry.
I don't know, man.
Content warning, it's going to be very spooky up in here this episode.
The spook meter is going to be constantly clipping red.
Yes. But no, welcome to Pros and Cons. If you hadn't guessed already, this is our Halloween Spooktacular. So this is we're going over to the corner of our bookshelves where some cobwebs have grown, which I guess is more sad than spooky. We just got to read that
it's
section.
A seasonal keyword grab.
But no, welcome to Pros and Cons, and today we're going to be getting into some spooky stories here with Paddy Boylan.
I'm Paddy Boylan. I perform sacrifices at midnight, and sometimes I wake up screaming.
Oh, that was excellent. Alex Eldridge is here with us as well.
Yes, my name is Alex Eldridge. I'm involved with multiple cults and am planning a homicide currently.
And I am...
Also,
Phoenix.
I write.
I am Phoenix Rigg. And I am the conductor of this seance, and I have called in Paddy and Alex here with me, and I can hear them, so that's a sign. And yeah, today we're gonna be breaking the mold of what we normally do, and rather than kind of breaking down some sort of topic, we're actually gonna be sharing some of our favorite scary stories with you, those that have truly and honestly spooked us for some of that juicy spookiness, but also oh yeah,
well, I'd like to share a side tangent that I'd like to explore a little bit. I'd like to talk with you guys maybe toward the end of the lesson, the podcast. I also teach, it comes through sometimes, about what you think actually makes scary writing scary, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately, even outside of the podcast, and yeah, I want to get your angles on it, your angles on this particular dangle.
Yes. So we'll share these stories, and then we'll also kind of we will do some analysis of why we think they scared us and things like that. And with that, we're going to jump into it. I'm going to share one little story. I am going to cheat. I have two stories because I wanted one literary, because the one that really and truly freaked me out for quite some time was a movie. So I'm going to scare that as well. But I'm also going to read a little bit of something here. Searchers after horror haunt strange, far places. For them are the catacombs of Ptolemais and the cavern mausolea of the nightmare countries. They climb to the moonlit towers of ruined Rhine castles and falter down black cobweb steps beneath the scattered stones of forgotten cities in Asia. The haunted wood and the desolate mountain are their shrines, and they linger around the sinister monoliths of uninhabited islands. But the true epicure in the terrible, to whom a new thrill of unutterable ghastliness is the chief end and justification of existence, esteems most of all the ancient, lonely farmhouses of backwoods New England. For there the dark elements of strength, solitude, grotesqueness, and ignorance combine to form the perfection of the hideous. The most horrible of all sights are the little unpainted wooden houses remote from traveled ways, usually squatted upon some damp, grassy slope or leaning against some gigantic outcropping of rock. 200 years and more they have leaned or squatted there, while the vines have crawled and the trees have swelled and spread. They are almost hidden now in lawless luxuriances of green and guardian shrouds of shadow, but the small paned windows still stare shockingly as if blinking through a lethal stupor which wards off madness by dulling the memory of unutterable things. And that is The Picture in the House by H.P. Lovecraft.
It is
Nice.
Lovecraft. Okay.
Yeah.
It's
very
amazing
Lovecraft,
how, as someone who has never read Lovecraft, he still manages to, you can pick it just by knowing about the man and his writing.
Yeah, he's got a
Yeah.
voice.
It's
He
arcane.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely is a voice.
Arcane, that's the word for sure.
Okay, so that's good. Is that part of a longer story?
It's part of a longer story, but it's well, it's actually one of his shorter works. Like you could read it in probably 45 minutes. Something like that. But yeah, H.P. Lovecraft, written December 12th, 1920. And that's one of my favorite introductions to a story. And I'm not sure if it's just because it's well written or if it's because I've thought about this so many times. And I feel like a lot of people have thought about this as well. But just the empty house in the middle of nowhere that exists there. And it's like, what does it contain? And you look at the
Yes.
windows and it's who's living there, who has lived there. I've recently, I kind of feel like I might write a story on something like this, but I love the idea of there's some special thrill with the second story of a house. Like you see that trope a lot in a lot of horror where people look
Someone
at
looking
a
through
house.
it,
Yeah, there's someone looking through. It's always the second story. And when they enter the house, there's always a sound coming from the second story. And I feel like it's because it's something that's more in the house. Like you have to go deeper into the house. You're not right next to the front door.
Yes.
You have to go up, you have to wander through, and who knows where the staircase is. How do you get upstairs, and what do you have to go through to get there?
Or down sometimes.
Or down.
Yeah, into
That's
the
still a
cellar.
second story. Yeah, it's just a second story
But
vertically. I think
you couldn't really see someone looking at you from a basement though, unless there was like some little peephole there.
No,
they
not
could
in
look
terms
up
of,
at you from the stairs, maybe through the floorboards.
but
Yeah,
in
maybe.
terms of the thing that beckons you from the street where you think you saw someone, it's usually in the second story. And it's like, I like that idea of needing to wander deeper into a house. And it's again those windows that look out, and it's something that's calling you in. And it's but,
There's also the notion of house as face too. You know, like you've got the two windows,
Ooh.
and then you have the door, which functions as a mouth. And you see a lot of horror describing houses. In particular, I'm thinking of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, but plenty of people do it. She probably just does the best. Where it really describes the facade of this face, and it's of this house, and it's even in the word there, facade, as just somehow like not right, but resembling this sort of face. And that's a really common trope that gets seen as well. And I think that's, you know, the facade you present on your house maybe reflects on what's going on inside. So you know, it's a good sort of like a microcosm or macrocosm.
I have never considered this before. Face as house's face, or facade as linking to face. Like that. Oh, that's quite profound. The windows are the window to the soul.
Window to someone else's eyes or soul. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Windows are the eyes to the house.
The window to the person in the second story who has eyes, which are windows to their soul. Think about it.
Yeah,
And
which has a house in it.
It's an infinite regress. It was spooky. It is spooky. I like it. Establishes the sense of desolation, and then putting the house immediately frames it in the context of desolation. So it sets it up from the get-go as this house is eerie. This house almost shouldn't be. That's what I got from it anyway. I don't know what happens in the story.
Yeah.
But
And then I will share a little bit. So in this story, that's just the setting to give the context of these houses. And then we meet our main character who's traveling along a road, and due to forces of nature, something that's, you know, weather's terrible, his hand is forced, and he's forced into one of these houses that he sees on this hill that he can't avoid, even though it creeps him out, even though it's telling him no, he has to go in because of the weather. So it's just too terrible. So he enters in, it seems abandoned, there's nobody there, but he forces his way in, or the door actually might be open, I believe, and then he walks in. He's walking through these empty, dusty halls that look like they haven't seen life for quite some time, and finds himself into a room where he finds a picture on a wall, and it's just carnage in this picture, grotesque butchery of animal parts and guts and things on the floor, and it just gives him this unsettling, disturbing feeling. And then from there, he starts to hear a sound coming from the second floor, a creaking on the wood up above him. And then it's the slow shifting of weight as something's moving through the house, coming down towards him. And it comes to the door, and it opens the door, and it's this disheveled, old, unsettled, unhinged looking man who actually comes in and starts talking to him. And from there, they sit down they sit down at the table, and the old man brings a book down from the shelf and opens it and has him start reading it to him. And this old man can't really seem to read, or if he can, his English isn't very good, but he has him start recounting it. He has the traveler start reading a tale to him, or start recounting a tale to him, with more of these grotesque details, this butchery, this really like sharp stuff that's really hard to kind of take, and the reader's feeling unsettled as this man seems to be savoring all these details a bit too much, like relishing all these details, and it's a lot.
Uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's very uncomfortable, but I don't know, should I say?
Of spoilers.
Yeah, so spoiler.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
I think that's a tantalizing amount to leave us with.
Yeah,
enough to make us want to read the story.
there. Yeah, you could read it
And now
in
that-
an evening. It's very good.
And Lovecraft, I think, is past copyright now, so we should
Yeah,
be available
I
to get
believe
for
so.
free.
Yeah,
1920s.
at the very least, I found
Yeah.
it on. You can go to hplovecraft.com, and there's an archive there, and it's all available right there.
I need to delve into his stuff. He's such a giant with such a long shadow that I need to finally get into some. I hear Mountains of Madness is a very good place to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I started. It's pretty
Yeah.
good.
And then it's got some really
Wow.
creepy penguins.
Yeah, that's the penguin. There's a shogger.
Okay. I don't know what that is.
Well, and I'm not spoiling anything, am I?
No.
I actually have a story as well, but it's also Lovecraft. So maybe you want to go first, Paddy, as a bit of a palate
Okay.
cleanser.
Okay, a gap between the Lovecraft.
Mhm.
So I was thinking in the preparation for this that I don't read a lot of horror. I don't watch a lot of horror either. I'm often not into it because there's a lot of scary films I don't find scary, a lot of scary books I don't find scary. But when they're scary, oh boy. When I saw The Ring as like a late teenager or early 20s or something, I couldn't sleep in the same room as a TV for quite a while. So when things get under my skin, they really affect me. But I'm yet to really read much that's really scared me. I've read some Stephen King, actually, at Alex's suggestion. And I like it. I like his writing a lot, but I'm yet to be scared by it. And actually, there's a thing that Stephen King does that I want to talk about later. So I want to try and put a pin in that and see if I remember. It's a very interesting thing that he does. But then I remembered that I've read Mother Horse Eyes. Have you guys ever heard?
Oh, you've
Mother
told me
Horse
about
Eyes?
this.
Mother Horse
Yeah.
Eyes.
I'm sure I have.
You have, yeah.
The title alone freaks me out.
Oh, yeah. It's imagine that you're on Reddit and you're browsing Reddit and you're looking for a ragu recipe, a delicious ragu that you're going to make at a family event that's coming up. And so you found this wonderful post. It's the most popular post on family ragus, r/family ragus, let's just say. And you've read it and it's great. And it ends with, and that's how you make a wonderful ragu. And the first comment on that post is like, yeah, wonderful. I can't wait to make that for my family. And then the second comment is something like this. When I was little, they took mummy away and put me with a new mummy in a smelly, dark house. They said she was a real person, but I knew she wasn't. They had made her. Her face was made from pieces of animal, pig cheeks, hairy goat jaw, old horse eyes. They sewed her together badly and the seams were crusty. I hated her. Real mummy called me from underground. I opened the attic window at sundown and let the spring breeze flow in. I heard her song floating in the cool air, soft singing from the grave. And that's it. And there's no context. And then everyone else is like, what the fuck? What the fuck? And it immediately gets like as many upvotes as it does downvotes. And then immediately for like a few hours goes the front page of Reddit. And that's what this guy did. No one to this day knows who Mother Horse Eyes is. No one. They never actually came up with it, but they wrote about 100 posts and then they just vanished of the most. Ooh, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. People later on have called the body of work the Flesh Interface series. I'm not going to get into what a flesh interface is, partly because but if you read it, you can get a sense of. I'll just leave it at that. The Flesh Interface series. All these stories are connected, right? Even that Mother Horse Eyes thing. And in the few times that he did sort of reveal himself to the audience, him or a personality he's playing, it's hard to say. He described himself as a mid-30s male who lives in a men's home, like a place for homeless men. He's alcohol and drug addicted, and that he's not writing fiction. Everything he's writing, he says, is real. It either happened to him or they are things that are going to happen. He says he took too much acid once as a young man in his young 20s, and that everything he's writing now is a result of that. It's allowed him to see into this possible set of futures and alternate presents that are coming, and that Mother Horse Eyes waits at the bottom of it all, and she is inevitable, and that soon we will be in the womb of her embrace. Man, I spent like a good week going through this guy's stuff, and yeah, it's deeply, deeply disturbing. And the fact that we don't know if this person is real and mentally ill, a really talented author who's decided never to reveal himself and stay in character always, or has some kind of glimpse beyond the veil, just makes it all the more like, ooh. I
mean, that brings up an interesting point, but okay, let's take even the snippet that you just brought to us then. Like that is
people have called it a new mummy, by the way. New Mummy is the name of that one.
Okay.
New Mummy, okay. That is using literary conventions and literary tools and tropes that are, this is not the ravings of a lunatic, like that is very precisely constructed. So that makes me think,
could it be a very talented amateur?
I mean, at that point, what I'm saying is, is the question like whether he is just mentally ill and just like saying, this is what I believe, or is it something that he has constructed? I would be tempted to think the meta-narrative of him as a mentally ill person feeds into that. So it's almost like performance art, if you know it. That would be my take on it. I don't imagine this could be without a level of artifice, but I'm a little cynical, so.
No, I think you probably are right if we're going to like pierce the veil for a moment. And maybe it's based on some truth, but the truth is probably he knows what he's doing. He's very conscious of it, and his writing, even when he goes into this is me, into this performative character, but he never broke character, but he never revealed his identity, even after this stuff like blew up. Like there's a whole cult following behind this guy. The fact that girl, right? The fact that they never revealed who they are, that's discipline. Like that's staying to message, right?
Yeah.
I would have cashed in, but
did it have did it have like a conclusion at all? Like did he finish it up, or did it just kind of like zip?
It kind of ends, and it's one of those, this will be my last post.
Okay.
You will not hear from me again. And then it's, the last one wasn't the best, to be honest. It was interesting, but it didn't have the impact of some of his early stuff, which is chilling madness. Yeah. I recommend it to everyone. I'm going to try and include some links in the description. Really, really worth checking out this body of work, because it's, as a world building exercise as well, the way he writes a world over the course of like disparate Reddit posts, really something. Yeah.
That's crazy. Very affecting.
Yeah.
I love passive world building like that, where you just like get these little snippets into broader contexts, and it just kind of like, oh, I guess that's part of the world, and it makes sense and starts to puzzle piece itself in.
Yeah.
I love that.
And at the risk of going on a little too long, also brilliant marketing, right? This guy got noticed by taking really popular posts from popular subreddits and inserting his madness into the conversation completely unasked for. Clever. And the horrified, confused reaction of people is what brought attention to his stuff. So people have collated it since and made it into like a big archive where you can read stuff, but they've pulled these things from subreddits about like shopping and cooking and cryptocurrency and completely unrelated things. Anyway, Mother Horse Eyes. Really, I'm a fan.
It kind of has a modern like War of the Worlds sort of feel where you're going into this
Yeah.
popular broadcasting medium and kind of delivering something as truth. Alex, the Eldritch horror will now transition over to you.
One of the structure writes horror.
Yeah, well, I mean, Phoenix.
I dabble.
Horror.
Dabble. I dabble.
You dabbled in horror.
I do not dabble much, but I do dabble.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd like to read some of your horror. No, there's the one thing about the vampire. I don't know if that's horror, but
no, I'd say that's horror. Yeah, I like that one.
Slightly unhinged.
But so I'm also looking at a Lovecraft story, and it's Lovecraft is kind of funny. To quote,
it's hilarious.
The second time this episode. The quote King has is that you have to bring as much to it as he brings to you, because there is you sort of need to put a little bit of Vaseline over the lens of his writing, because in one way he is a very fine writer. He's got an excellent vocabulary. He's very able to evoke a mood, and he is he's pretty masterful at building tension over the period of a story. Having said that, his characters are often very flat and one-dimensional. There is obviously the looming specter of his racism and sexism to some extent. We won't really get into that, but that does sort of cloud some of his work. And also, it does have a tendency to ramble sometimes. So this is just presenting the two things. So I've always been of the opinion that, like, when I'm reading Lovecraft, I started reading it and I got an audiobook and went through it and was like, this is good stuff. There's something in here, but I can't quite work it out because not all of it captures in the same way. The Mountains of Madness is very good, and the one I'm going to, the Dagon is also very good as well. The Cthulhu Mythos I'm not as big into, but this one, I think, for me at least, captures the best Lovecraft at his best and his most sort of chilling and his most literally otherworldly and bizarre. So this story is called The Color Out of Space, and the idea is basically it's told, as many of his stories are told, from the perspective of an academic who is basically going and I forget exactly what it was. I haven't read it super recently, but basically he's going and canvassing these people because there's going to be this dam built. So he's going and sort of doing research on that, and he meets this man named Army, Ammi, and basically Army recounts to him the story of what happened in this place. Not a huge amount of time ago, maybe 10, 20 years ago, 10, 15. And basically what happens is there's this storm in the night, and a meteor kind of comes down, and everyone's all freaked out and stuff. And then they go and investigate it, and basically there's this sort of goo or liquid. They say it doesn't have a color. They can't describe its color. So it already goes into that tropism of Lovecraft being like, oh, it was indescribable. But in this case, that's very literally true. Like this color, we literally don't have the words to, there is no color that looks like this color. This color is somehow not on the spectrum. I always imagine it as sort of shiny purple. That's just how I
Yeah, me too.
But clearly it couldn't be that. Yeah, exactly. Like sort of see through. Anyway, whatever. But this story, over the course of, like, there's not a lot of action in it, which I really appreciate in horror. I feel like, especially in horror, the action should be the big hammer that comes down at the end, and that's really it. Like I'm not huge into slashers because there's just this constant treadmill of like, oh, then they get killed. Oh, then they get killed. It's not like the tension, like there are diminishing returns on the tension. Let's say that.
Yeah.
But basically what happens is, over the course of this story, the land itself starts becoming more wild. And because this guy's a farmer, the guy's name is Nahum. This is our narrator getting a narration from Army talking about a man named Nahum. So it's like 3 times removed. It's a little abstruse. But basically these crops grow really wildly, and he's like, oh, great, it's a bumper crop, bumper harvest. But then he eats it, and they all taste a bit strange, a little bit off. And over the course of this narrative, you see this family from the perspective of Army go slowly insane and slowly isolate themselves until they like literally disintegrate. Like I mean that in the most literal sense. And just the like the way that he tells that, going from the beginning of that where this starts, and it's like, oh, you know, that like he begins like to describe the animals, like things just don't look quite right. There's a hair that has these weird proportions. The sows start to go a bit crazy, but just the arc, the stretch of tension over the course of this story is probably done better in short form than I think maybe any other piece of horror fiction that I've read. I think King comes pretty close sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
That's 3. But he has a little bit more of a zoomed in focus, which has its own appeal. But there's very, very little that is quite as close to this. And basically, in the end of it, we discover that this, you know, it goes back to the beginning of the guy, and we find out that he's actually taking measurements and things for this dam, because there's going to be a dam drilled into this land, and then that's going to basically go into the water supply, and whatever this color is may have the potential to, you know, infect the water table or something. And basically, you know, the implications are that's, you know, everyone could kind of lose it a little bit. So yeah, that is a summary of the color of outer space. And yeah, it's just a very, I honestly feel like I haven't ruined anything, because the reading of it itself is it's just so well composed. It's just such a well composed story. Does it make sense?
Is it a short story or a novella?
Yeah, it's quite short. It's it is I'd say it's somewhere between a novella and a short story. I'd say maybe 15,000, 20,000 words. Couldn't be much more than that. It's about 90 minutes as an audiobook. And it's just, yeah, very, very atmospheric, very creepy. None of the characters are particularly well drawn, but they're believable, you know?
Yeah, they're functional. It's one of those things that's, the story is so in the zeitgeist. Like, I was aware of the color of magic through mostly video games that have used elements of it, or roleplay games that have used elements of it. Like, there's a cool thread of like Dungeons and Dragons and roleplay games that use Lovecraftian supernatural stuff and elements like the color of magic. Like, there is a comet
color out of space,
near where it lands.
Yeah, color out of
nothing
space.
is the same.
Color of magic is a Terry Pratchett.
Very different book.
Very different.
Not the color
Also a
of
good book.
magic.
Very different.
Yeah, it pops up everywhere. I've not read it, but I feel like I have. Have you guys seen the movie?
No, with Nicolas Cage.
I haven't.
With Nicolas Cage, yeah, it's wild.
I'm sure it's great. I want to
The
see
Color
it.
of Magic
Prime
is
Cage.
Nicolas Cage.
I wish it did as Rincewind. Yeah,
that'd be great. I'd pay to see that.
yeah, I'd pay to see a lot of things.
Such a silly book, though. It's so silly.
The person that's describing the hair that doesn't look quite right and stuff, that's the person that has eaten.
So that is Nahum, who is the ultimate point of
who's
contact
recounting.
Here.
Yeah.
So there's the I forget I think he's an unnamed narrator who was talking to Army, who's then relating this story, and because Army was going back and forth and seeing the degradation and breakdown of this guy Nahum. So I believe it's Nahum who's like, oh, you know, just the animals just don't, like, I hit a groundhog and just something about it was like it was all twisted and just awful.
In the movie,
there are these things
llamas
around the edges that start to kind of, and eventually this is the best analogy I can have. Like, there's these things around the edges that start to sort of blur and become corrupted, and then they slowly make their way into the internal structure of the story and affect the family, the chief family that are there. It's really sad, actually, because like two of them are just kids and they just go absolutely nuts. One like lives down in the bottom of a well. It's wild.
Do you guys think, regarding Lovecraft, that it is the arcaneness of his writing that made him never blow up in his own time? Like, obviously now he's a legend, but I think I'm right in saying, like, in his own time he barely made a splash, right? Is that something about his writing itself, do you think? Like his prose?
I think it's difficult to separate his prose from his content. I think why Lovecraft is so compelling is because I think from a very, very deep level, there's this through line. So like, you don't have Lovecraft without his prose. You don't have him without him as a person. and of all his attendant vices and fears. And you don't have him without his interest in this supernatural. I think the reason why it works so well is that it just through some freak of literary nature, he is just this absolute like total consistency there, which is why it's so compelling. I think that's one of the reasons why, and it's not like perfect, but it is very consistent.
Looking back now at his body of work, we're appreciating it because we can see it as a whole like constellation of stuff. Do you think that's part of it?
Yeah, I think that is part of it. I think the mythos is a part of it as well, like as in his whole mythos. But I think it's more the fact that he drills down into these, like it's his quote. It's like, the oldest and strongest emotion of man is fear, and I think he taps into that so legitimately, sometimes clumsily, but always with like this very authentic sense of this is how he is. I think that pervades the writing, and I think that's a big part of why he's lasted as long as he has. But that's just
in terms of like maybe why he didn't particularly blow up in his time.
Yeah, maybe it's a little arcane. Yeah, I'd say so. It's certainly he was emulating an earlier time. He was emulating the 1800s in terms of how he wrote. So I don't know whether Victorian fiction was in fashion then, or maybe, I don't know. But yeah, it's kind of arcane. It's kind of weird stuff. Like, I mean, you give it to a 14-year-old, they're going to be like, what the fuck is this? Like, imagine giving the TikTok crowd like Lovecraft manuscripts and being like, this is canon. Some of them will like it. A lot of them won't.
I feel like, I want to say, like, I wonder if people kind of weren't ready for it at the time, because it dips into a lot of stuff that's a little bit more popular in our current zeitgeist with like sort of deep space, other dimensional, where I mean, it's kind of like, so I was talking to CM Kozeman. I have an interview with CM Kozeman. You could go listen to that if you want, author of All Tomorrows. We're talking about just like nowadays people are very into alternate timelines, alternate dimensional timelines, and that's very like people have an easy time grasping that because it's it's very much so part of our kind of cultural discussion, is this idea of alternate dimensions, that there could be infinite realities and stuff like this. But back then, but go back not that long ago, and people would be like, what are you talking about? Infinite dimensions, infinite possibilities. And it's just these sorts of things. Yeah, what does that mean? It's just these sort of things that kind of become sort of things that we naturally understand because we're all talking about them. Back in like 1920s, when he wrote this stuff about the house, I mean, it's just about a house, and that's very easy to understand. But some of his other stuff, like, what do you mean you can't describe it? Like, what do you mean you can't blah? At the time, it might be like, I mean, this is next level. It's more like, this doesn't make any sense. I don't get it.
Yeah.
It could be some of that
now in a way that it didn't before. I think he would have had a field day with AI as well. Like, I think if he were writing now, the things he'd have to say about AI would be just super on point, like definitely the terrifying side of it, There's another thing that I really like about his work, is the intersection of this arcane and science as well. And it wasn't the same science we have, but it is this. It's another hallmark of Victorian literature, actually. Like, Dracula is
very Frankensteinian.
Yeah, exactly. It's like there's magic, but there's also science, and maybe never the twain shall meet, or maybe like they're inextricably linked.
Yeah, it's Age of Enlightenment stuff, right? Where seances are starting to go hand in hand with like experiments about magnetism, where it feels like the veil is being peeled back for the first time. And at the same time, there's these new religions and mysticisms. So it must have been a time of the world suddenly seeming much bigger and weirder than it had before.
It's crazy when you think about it, like the Victorian sort of thing about science coming in, and it's usually very heavily related to electricity. When electricity was coming out, when it was fresh, people were terrified of it, and like
with good reason.
So it's like, it makes a lot of sense that it's very heavily involved in things like Frankenstein and Dracula and stuff, where it's these demonic figures that go hand in hand with this science, this witchcraft or whatever.
It would have seemed like magic. Like, it would have seemed like, this is sorcery. You guys are dealing in sorcery. I want to be part of this. Or like, I definitely want a part of this. This is sorcery.
Yeah.
One or the other.
The other So I'm just in the spirit of sharing scary things. I do just want to also share this little sort of bonus story that I have, which is it deals with the empty house trope in some ways. So it's got a through line. But one story that really truly terrified me and I had trouble sleeping for about a week after seeing it, and it actually put me off to scary movies after this. I was like, you know what? I don't have to watch scary movies anymore. Like, this isn't worth it. Was Paranormal Activity. That one, yeah. And I know a lot of people have heard of it, and probably a few of you were like, oh, that wasn't scary. But for me, that freaked me the heck out, just because I think it does some really great stuff with like just empty space, things just kind of happening in this quiet.
Yeah.
And it's not even, it doesn't deal with a lot of shock factor. It just has this silent tension that's looming outside of, it's just kind of unsettling. Something's happening.
Yes.
And it's very subtle. The like one part that really freaked me out was just and spoiler alert, but it's a very old movie now. But they're sleeping, and there's just this thump, this thunderous thump in the house, and it's like, what? And they wake up, and they look down the stairs, and it's just they film from the landing, and they're just looking through the house, and you just see the chandelier moving, like something really rattled the house almost.
I remember that.
And it's that fact that, again, it's this, and that was it. And then they go back to sleep, and that's kind of the end of the scene from what I can remember. But it's just this, it's this thing that echoes off in the bowels of the house, deeper in the house than you are currently. And it happened while you weren't there. So it's something happening in parts of the house that you're not currently in. And it's almost this idea of like, if I'm not looking at it, does it really exist? And it's kind of like, yes, it does. And it's this, and it plays on that sort of fear. And you see the chandelier swinging, and it's your own home, and you're left with like the aftermath of it. It's like, what?
Yeah, very much so.
What happened in this room? And that just like, it's a whole movie of that, these little things that are happening that you're not quite there for, and you're not quite understanding, and it terrifies
you.
And you
never fully understand, right? You never actually get a grip of it, which I really like. Yeah, the whole time there's a sense of I'm going to call it the evil, like evil in inverted commas, but the evil is there. It's right there, but you can't see it and you can't detect it, but it is right there on your nose the whole time. Yeah. It's really unsettling. And the whole thing is like found footage and security footage in the house, right?
Yeah. It's just a hand cam that this couple's using.
Yeah, that makes it more real.
Can I ask, does it get real Hollywood at the end and like shit starts to really like, or does it just kind of...
Not from memory.
I can't remember. Well, I think with the first one, it is pretty chill. I think in latter ones, they do that thing where it kind of has a feedback loop where it sort of gets more crazy in action in Hollywood. I know something does.
I like that.
I think it's one of those things, and it's been a while since I've seen it. I only watched it the once, and I didn't watch it again. But I think there's like I think there is kind of a moment at the end, but it's the very end, and then it's like So they do a good job of like the fear comes from, it's not the action, it's not the violence or anything like that. It's the tension.
Yeah, and that's what horror is to my.
That's what horror is. Like, as soon as you break that, you've lost it.
Yeah, I read a really good. It was just a comment on a horror books thread that I follow, and and someone was talking about how they'd read Hill House by Shirley Jackson and didn't really like it. It wasn't really for them. And someone was like, "Look, if this isn't for you, that's fine. But what you've described is not gothic horror. Gothic horror is because the original poster was saying something about the sort of horror she liked. And the person said gothic horror is when they give you all the pieces right at the beginning and you might not realize it. But then from there, there's just this slowly building dread until it reaches this one point where you suddenly realize all the pieces that you've been given to come together. And that realization, that flashpoint is just like, oh God. And that is gothic horror.
Oh.
Or one interpretation of it anyway. I thought that was a really good description of how it works. Because that's the sort of stuff I like to read and watch.
It's also a clever payoff as well, right? Where you find like, oh, wow, the kill was in the house the whole time kind of thing. It's always the feeling when all the dominoes fall is a beautiful moment.
Yeah. Oh, and then the color drains from your face, and you can. And you're just like, Do you have an example by any chance of a good gothic horror piece?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I'd say my favorite example of that particular style of gothic horror is just the diary entries of Dracula. And I'm sure I've talked about this before,
Mm,
but if you go through that, it's just the guy comes into the house, he's greeted by this eccentric, sort of host, and the guy's like, "Oh yeah, no, it's you come in, you can stay as long as you want and whatever." And then it just ratchets up the tension and ratchets up the tension, and he goes and he sees these weird things, and he like sees these like shapes moving, and just it becomes more and more uncomfortable, and this guy who originally seems to be this old guy is becoming progressively younger and younger, and you can see it. And then at the end, he suddenly realizes he's being kept prisoner in this house. And then he confronts Dracula, and he's like, you have to let me go. You have to let me out of this house. And Dracula's like, that's fine. You can go whenever you want. And he opens the door, and just like as far as the eye can see, there's just wolves, and wolves are just like staring, and they're just waiting. So you're finally like, fuck, like this guy is dead. Like it, but it just all built up to this one climax, and it's just it gives me shivers. Just yeah, I think that's one of the fine. Yeah, that's another of the finest pieces of horror I think I've read. The rest of the book is good. It's very good. It's a very, very good book, but it's not quite as good as that epistolary initial portion, which is maybe like novella.
Yeah, that first bit's like quarter of the book or something. It's definitely the meat, the full beef of the book comes after that, but it's just the scene setting. The thing that unsettled me about, because I love Dracula as well, but the first part was like anytime, because it's this weird thing where Dracula's the source of, it's like something is wrong here. The source of all the problem is this guy, but at the same time, he's this pillar of safety for the person. Like the guy is only truly and really safe when he's near Dracula, almost, because the other things in the house are more deadly. At the very least dangerous. With Dracula, there's this formality, there's something about there's a veneer, there's something about there's a chivalry almost, where you kind of like, you get the sense that he's not going to hurt him even though he's the source of all the problems here. But the other things in the house don't have that same level of restraint, and like anytime he goes wandering off in the house, you get more dread because you don't know what he's going to find, and Dracula's not with him. More dangerous. So it's more dangerous.
The tension between the thing which offers safety and familiarity is also, on some level, it is the worst thing and the source of all the bad. That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Ooh, I'd like to explore
both the
that.
best thing and the worst thing at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a really terrifying concept. I mean, it's the reason why a lot of I just read a thriller about basically what's the term, like an abusive sort of controlling like husband, and like how he works on his victims, and you see it from the perspective of the mother, this girl being subjugated, but never in any way that you can pick out. And like the more she kind of reaches out and goes like, hey, this isn't cool what he's doing, the more it seems like she's like being controlling herself. So it's this really delicate like push-pull of like, I can't, so it's like there's like the very fact that he's being controlling stops her from calling him out, and it's very well done.
Whoa.
That's actually by Catherine Jinks, who's we're going to do an interview. I have done an interview with, which we'll put out recently. The book is traced. It's very good book.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah,
it's good.
That was a weird moment for me where I was like, whoa, sounds like a really incrable author. And it's like, you did an interview with her. She's on our podcast. Okay. Nice.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's right.
It's a weird thing when you read someone's books and then get to meet them, and you're like, oh wow, you're actually just a person, like it's a really cool thing. Or the other way, where you're like, you meet someone, you're like, oh yeah, whatever, and then you actually read some of the work, and you're like, oh wow, okay.
We should make a goal, like a long-term goal of this podcast, to interview Stephen King. We got to get him on.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that'd be great. We have to be soon though. He's like 80.
Oh, you can shoot for the stars. Yeah.
We'll cash in our Stephen King counter, the little reference we've been saving up through the entire podcast, and we'll get him on.
Like, Mr. Bigging, Mr. King, we've got 100 points. Like, who are you? How did you get my email?
No, he'd say, "Who are you? How did you get this many Stephen King points?"
Yeah.
Who gave you these
What are you
Stephen
doing
King
under my
points?
bed?
Yeah.
Speaking of Stephen King, I know, Alex, you've read Stephen King, obviously. Phoenix, have you read any?
I actually haven't, but now I
Okay.
kind of want to because I feel like I have to at this point.
The good is good.
Yeah.
I've read 2 of his short stories, which people said this is, in my opinion, his scariest story. And obviously I've read The Raft, which you recommended. Great story. Really good story.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't
wonderful,
say that one's scary,
wonderful
but it is
tension. Not really scary. And the man in the suit, I've got it here. Something like the man in the black suit. Okay, so I read that today when I was cramming for this episode, and people said like this is his scariest, according to like a subset of
Really?
people
I've
who
never
read
read
it.
that.
Yeah, it was good. It was good, but I didn't find it like scary. And I know different things scare different people. I had a friend who, to him, ghost stuff, if he saw a ghost movie that I thought was average, he wouldn't be able to sleep for like nights. And to me, that stuff is like, I don't care about ghosts. But then there's other things that really get me. Right? Yeah, some people. So I'm wondering if there's the Stephen King book out there, which I've yet to read, which is really just going to haunt me for the rest of my days, or if maybe his kind of scary just isn't my kind of scary. I don't know. Why are you laughing at that, Phoenix?
Oh no, I laugh because you're saying like, when am I going to read the thing that's going to haunt me to the end of my days? And Alex just so casually, I can give you one.
No, I think of myself as the resident King expert. So I can't guarantee it'll scare you because it's people being scared by books is the most subjective thing in the fucking world. But I can tell you the one that scares me. It's particularly in audiobook format. What is it? It's Are
you going to say 1408?
Hotel number. It's like 1408.
Yeah, 1408. You've mentioned this on the podcast before. Yeah,
okay. That one is the audiobook particularly. Like it's just
I'm writing it down right now.
Like the first half of it isn't even the thing. It's just like the guy in a room with the hotel manager going like, please don't do this. Please don't stay in this room. Like here's all the reasons why. Like this. Like just don't do it. So it builds it up, and then the actual payoff is like amazing. It's I feel maybe I'm overhyping it to you, but it scares me. It scares me.
Man, I'm gonna read it tonight. I'm actually excited. I'm excited to be scared by a book because it rarely happens.
But I mean, maybe it'll happen. Maybe it won't. But yeah, the audiobook in particular, there's a thing that happens at the end of the audiobook that freaks me out.
Yeah. Oh, okay. It's a tantalizing tidbit. Can I mention that thing that I was sorry? This is the thing that I mentioned earlier that I said I'd like to come back to. There's a thing that Stephen King has done in both of his stories, and I'm getting the feeling that it's something he does a lot. He injects weird points of absurd humor, often at like the peak of the tension. Alex, you're nodding like you know about this.
Yeah.
There's the man in the black suit. There's a scene where I don't want to give too much of away, but this man in the black suit, who is kind of a supernatural figure, is chasing this kid after having just... How do I describe this in a way that doesn't sound ridiculous? Well, it kind of is ridiculous. He swallowed a fish whole for reasons that I won't get into, and the fish is still kind of half hanging out of his throat. So as he's chasing this boy, he's got half a fish flapping around out of his mouth. It's flopping around on his face.
Whoa.
Like really silly and absurd, but something about the madness of that in the moment makes it more scary. And there's something similar he does in The Raft as well. Yeah.
He also uses laughter as this point of insanity. Like he'll often do this thing where like characters will just laugh maniacally when they're not
in The Raft.
Like almost as a pressure valve to let off. Like it's just like he'll say something about laughing with a tinge of hysteria or something. It's very common. He does it a lot. I'm not sure how I feel about it myself, but it's something he does a lot.
Yeah. I'm almost like torn between like, is it destroying some of the tension he's setting up, or is it leaning into it? And I don't know. I kind of like it. It's weird. It feels unhinged.
Definitely evocative.
All right. I think that's going to do it for our Spooktacular. Just to break this spooky tension for just a moment, we do have an anthology that's been nominated for a couple awards called The New Mythic. You can buy that on Amazon. If you've read it and have enjoyed it, please give it a review. That'd be great. Also, if you enjoyed this podcast that you've been listening to, Prose and Cons, please give that a review as well. That helps us out with the algorithm, as well as it makes our days very, very much. It's always fun to get a review. You can also watch on YouTube if you do want to see our faces while we record this. They're all up on there as well. And further, we do have an audiobook version of the new Mythic coming out. That's coming out very soon. I don't know the exact date of that, but that's coming out very soon. We've got
Very
some
soon.
incredible voice talent on there, including Rupert Degas, who you'll know from The Name of the Wind. He did the reading on Audible.
master.
Incredible
So
talent.
So
So keep an eye out for that. That's coming out very, very soon. I think that's everything. And Alex, I believe you have a quote to take us away with.
For sure. This one is from the man, the myth, the legend himself, Stephen King. He says, "People think that I must be a very strange person. This is not correct. I have the heart of a small boy. It is in a glass jar on my desk."
Oh, Mr. King.
Oh,
It's
Mr.
funny.
King. But thank you all for tuning in. I hope you had a fun, spooky time with us. Enjoy your Halloween. And yeah, read or watch something scary. It can be fun sometimes. And we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.
You're listening to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.